Thanks for taking the time to download this Negotiating with the Power of Understanding live podcast, created for the Knowledge Network of Thunderbird School of Global Management. To find more information on how to be an effective negotiator, please visit Dr. Karen Walsh's online educational series on Negotiating with the Power of Understanding at knowledgenetwork.thunderbird.edu/Walsh. In this series, you'll find a variety of podcasts, online discussions, and other resources that will help you succeed in the toughest negotiations. Learn from global leaders their secrets on negotiations. Online around the world, this is Thunderbird Knowledge Network, negotiating with the power of understanding.
So we're going to start our discussion today. Professor Teagarden, I'm going to address the question to you to begin the discussion. So how, from your expertise and from your knowledge all these years in emerging markets, how do you believe a local company in these emerging markets can actually develop the negotiation power when they're negotiating with a multinational company?
When I look at these multinationals from emerging markets, we call them emerging market multinationals, creative name. Part of how they create value is what they have to offer multinationals. So I encourage them to focus on how do they create value and build a case for how they create value. For example, Lenovo in China is able to create value for foreign partners by localizing product to enable foreign partners to get into China. Grupo Alpha is able to create value because of access to a distribution network in Mexico.
So do you consult the companies that they should try to, do you think it's important how they go before the negotiation, like what image they have created for the market?
Certainly the image they've created is important. That's what we say about ourselves. But much more important is what they actually do. How do they create value? And being able to build the business case for how they create value gives them power in the negotiation setting.
So to ask a more practical question on that, when they're actually negotiating, how do you see it more successfully when they actually show to the multinational company that they actually have this power? If they are small, if they have started.
A small company has to be able to know how they create value, build the case for how they create value, talk about examples of how they've created value for others, for example. But most importantly, be able to emphasize their own capabilities at creating value for their partner.
Great, yeah, makes sense. Dr. Walsh, from your negotiating expertise, how do you see that a local small company in emerging market can actually go there in the table of negotiations with a big player like that and have some power, have some leverage?
Well, I think what we're talking here is the classic elements of preparation and a particular mindset that small companies, small players, players that don't have much structural power really can increase their leverage when they really do know who they are, what they have to offer. They do some research on what the other party needs. And the more that there's an understanding of a high compatibility of needs, the more that a small player actually has a lot of leverage. The kind of knowledge about the local market, the products, the way things are done in a particular market. And the other is to increase leverage by these small companies to understand how poor the alternatives are for the large companies. To have done some research around the fact that there really are not many that provide this type of quality service or this kind of a mindset in terms of how things get done in that local market. So the two basic things are to know where the compatibility of needs are, increase that understanding, and then understand where your alternatives and their alternatives might not be as good as the parties working together.
I would say from the legal perspective, the beginning of business relationship in this case is pretty challenging because you need to choose a law. Choice of law in jurisdiction is a big issue, and quite a typical example is that the biggest players, established multinationals, they try to impose the law and jurisdiction they know. Is it ethical or not? That's probably not for a discussion of today, but that creates quite a big disbalance between the parties, where one party possesses quite a big knowledge and power with knowing legal system, or another party just entering new completely legal system, going there and exploring it. So that's I would consider the whole negotiation relationship as pretty disbalanced, and it's a need to balance it in the process.
So do you think that actually local companies have the choice of which legal
Like,
Like
choice
they're
always
gonna-
exists. The question is
Sure.
how you negotiate that. I would say it's pretty difficult to impose your rules or your playing field as a jurisdiction in the beginning. How you can leverage it and how you can change it, it's a matter of negotiation technique and part of the negotiation package. But lawyers, and it's a very conservative view, tend, from the multinational companies, a council, they tend to actually to stick to the playing field and the rules they know.
And is this something that you've been finding in your work, is that having a really good business case is a compatible interest, and the parties start working together on the business case, and then you find that legal counsel in the multinationals, for example, want to start with the legal or the rights protection before they start developing a mutual gains or interest-based strategy. A lot of our work has been to work with business development to actually negotiate with your own attorney, so you can actually work in these kind of emerging markets, so you build working trust first, then protect your rights with the law.
I have found that companies, that trust is the guarantor. Laws may or may not guarantee a positive outcome. Trust does guarantee a positive outcome. People won't do business unless they trust each other. So what I have seen is those companies that start with building a trusting relationship can evolve to the point where there's a mutually agreeable legal framework that they're willing to ascribe to. And along those lines, this is where the role of governments in emerging markets come in. Governments have an obligation to protect the interests of their organizations in their countries. And if you look at places like China, where I work extensively, the government goes out of its way to protect the interest of Chinese businesses, to the degree that laws are built and developed and shaped to protect those interests and enforced. But starting from that position of trust, I've had Chinese partners in these kinds of negotiations tell me, that's just words on paper. It's what happens between us as business people that makes the deal work, and I've seen that firsthand.
Right. So have we. Right.
Professor Teagarden, so from your experience, how do you see that it actually works? Because depending on where you come from, if you come from the West, for example, maybe you want to get into business right away. You think it's a waste of time if you build trust, if you get to know each other. But in emerging markets, we've seen that that's not the case. Maybe they spend a lot of time getting to know each other. What would you consult? What advice would you give to multinational companies, people, the managers that are there to negotiate?
When I talk to managers from multinationals, I always tell them, know the culture of the country you're going into. And if it is a culture where you have to build relationship first before you get down to business, don't use negotiators who can't do that. Some people can't do that. Some people are hardwired to get down to business and then talk about other things. But in most places around the world, you talk about other things before you can get down to business. I have to know you. I have to know I can respect you. I have to know that I can trust you before I can ever consider doing business with you. So part of the challenge for multinationals is selecting the right person to negotiate. And that is probably an experienced person who is very patient. I wouldn't send the same person to negotiate a contract in Mexico that I would send to Germany to negotiate a contract. So think and plan very carefully who can best represent us in this cultural setting.
And I would say this is that area that we talk a lot about in terms of understanding your own cultural perspective. And if you were to be in a situation where there is cultural gap, can you style switch? And even thinking about style switching can take a lot of time. And I have an example. I just worked with somebody recently who was working in China with a very well-known CEO of a company, owner of a company. And he was consulting, my friend was consulting with an individual from the U.S., was extremely successful with his business in the U.S. And my friend told him, don't talk about business on the first couple times that you go. And it was impossible for this man not to talk business. And when he was out on the golf course with his compatriot in China, he started talking about business. So my friend found out from the CEO that said that, I don't want to talk to that salesman again. And he was an owner and a very successful man in the U.S., but he was just seen as just a salesman, and that's not the type of person that the man in China wanted to work with. Even though he had planned the style switch, he still could not help himself in that particular environment.
That's really where experience comes into play.
Right,
Somebody
yeah.
with more experience develops that self-control, that ability to keep from moving into the behavior that's negative. It's not easy to do.
Right.
That the question of how to build a right negotiation team, going to the right country, this is definitely a big challenge. Lawyers usually are part of the negotiation team, even in the opening of negotiation. But they trust mostly in law. They don't really trust in a personal behavior, in other signs of trust, like body language or establishment of close personal relationship. So that's where the lawyers should be probably trained to develop another sense of trust. And what we see quite extensively in the world, and I agree fully with you, that law doesn't really provide you a security. And it's a common understanding that you can balance the risk you have in an emerging market, in a foreign country, with imposing your legal rules. But that doesn't work.
Right. That's why it's so hard to do business in emerging markets. When we come from more developed economies, more industrialized economies, we assume that we can impose. And the reality is, you can't make somebody do something they don't want to do.
So, Professor Waltz, I know there's a lot of trainings and that you give in that situation, but some quick tips for the companies that send the managers out there to negotiate. How can you prepare? How can they prepare their employees to style switch? What can you do before you go there? Perhaps choosing the right people, as Dr. Teagarden, is very important already. But if you don't have this experience and you don't have maybe this patient, proven, what can you do?
Well, we find that what's really important is that there is a particular knowledge that you need to know about how business is done. Sort of how do I understand how functional business works differently in that region? Then the other is that kind of mindfulness that comes with, do I know why I have preferences to behave in a particular way? That I'm a very doing person and I'm going into a being environment. First of all, how is that going to feel for me? And then how am I actually going to take some steps to behave differently than I normally would prefer not to? So we do a lot of work in terms of helping parties understand where are their attachments to their cultural preferences, and then do some practice, have some cognitive cues for themselves when they're going to be in a meeting that's going to stress their particular preference of the way they might behave, and then to have some coaching and debriefing. And of course there's a lot of materials available to gain the knowledge, but more importantly to get that skill development and practice, and to get feedback and get people to talk to you about that a little bit.
One of the things that I have seen work is videotaping. When you videotape a leader in an interaction and he or she can watch herself They see what they do, and that has a much more powerful imprint than just hearing about what
So
they
you're
might
saying
do
on the
differently.
nonverbals, right, right.
And also, I've known leaders who wear a rubber band on the wrong wrist to remind them something that is uncomfortable, mildly uncomfortable, to remind them to stay in the desired style and set of behaviors. Very practical kinds of
Yeah,
things.
I think that's very useful to know. It's very interesting. Just let me understand. So when they're videotaping, is it when they actually are in the setting, or is it before they practice?
In a simulation.
In a
before.
simulation. So they do
you
simulations.
So you see yourself, and once you
Yes.
see yourself, you're more aware of the behavior.
That's very interesting.
Full agree with Professor Teagarden and Professor Walsh about the understanding of power, or difference between power and force when you go and negotiate in emerging markets.
Yeah.
It's not that you go with the force there and occupy and do a business in this
Right.
way. You go with the power of understanding. You understand how it works there. You discover, and then you start to act. So this is just the shifting in the mindset and understanding how you do business there.
And it's a subtle shift, but a critical shift.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a little change, but high impact.
Yes.
And we've gotten really good results with just understanding what you can make little simple corrections and why they
Yeah.
mean so much in some of these particular environments.
Yeah.
So let me change the subject a little bit. So your expertise is in technology. What do you think what role does technology play and can play in negotiations?
At a very basic level, technology is wonderful for negotiators because it enables you to collect and amass more information. And the more you go into a negotiation as an informed party, the more effective the outcome in my experience. So part of what I see is managers who take the time to learn about the other company, how the other company creates value, enhance the opportunity to find those places where there's mutual or common interest. So at a very basic level, technology as a tool enables more effective negotiation because it enables more information. It also can slow down or impede negotiations because frequently we think that talking over a machine, talking over Skype or virtual meeting settings is a substitute for face-to-face meeting. And in fact, what I have seen in my work is without that face-to-face initial relationship building, it is very, very difficult to forge the kinds of bonds that really cement good deals.
Yeah, I agree.
And this probably is another issue of trust, like how you create trust then in a virtual negotiation or a blind negotiation,
Yeah.
where you not really observe the opponent.
Right.
You don't have a feeling about his way of communication and a body language, so you just rely on other aspects, and that's probably pretty tough.
Very tough. Yeah.
One of the ways that we're looking at some changes in the field of negotiation in terms of technology is the use of a planning software. And this is very useful in terms of having a very strong, there's so much information, but it has to be organized in a way so you actually can get a picture at looking at, these are my interests, these are theirs, that's their alternative, that's ours, these are some standards we can yield to. How am I going to negotiate? How strong is the relationship? So therefore, what strategy should I be using? So that's useful because if you are in a negotiation, you have all of that qualitative and quantitative information ready, you then can pay attention to the more social and emotional elements and cultural elements in the negotiation because strategically, you've got it all worked out.
You know where you're going.
Right, and what we also find is that people are so busy that if you're on a negotiation team and you haven't put all of the parts into the plan, some of us live in different parts of the country or the world, using that software helps the entire team sign off on the negotiation before they even begin. So we're finding that that is a way that companies that really have a strategy are doing an organizational software planning method and using the information in a very precise way to give them leverage and understanding in the negotiations.
Are there specific tools available commercially that do that?
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's
we have
wonderful.
it's called the Cultural Expert Negotiator that we've actually developed. And we're testing it right now in terms of the way that it brings teams together. It gives parties more confidence when they go to negotiate. And then they can record and debrief as a team what was the oversight they had when they were in the negotiation for the next iteration. So it's a very useful tool because there is way too much information for us.
I've sat through thousands of hours of negotiations in early research that I did, literally thousands of hours. And to have a tool that can organize information like that, what a powerful contribution to the negotiation process.
Yes, it is. And we're finding that it's in high demand, not only just for individuals, but for organizations. Because we've been looking at the training and negotiation. There's a lot of great training for individuals or executives, but there's very little in the organizational strategy. And that's where it usually falls apart. It's not connected with the organizational strategy.
Yeah.
And that's probably very relevant also for multinationals, where let's imagine the team negotiation team is changing. Like somebody is changing his workplace or just is busy, and then somebody else is stepping in the other person's shoes. So this not only that tool not only helps to structure negotiation, but also keep a trust level. What would happen if the new people are coming and they just start it from the beginning, or they just don't know information which was already negotiated and agreed? That just ruins the whole trust level in a negotiation at the point where it took so long to establish it and keep it, and then it can be ruined very fast. So I would believe that's also very important to keep the trust level negotiation using that tool.
Yeah, it's almost like collecting the institutional memory on experiences that they've had with different negotiators and in different regions of the world.
What a powerful database.
Yeah, it would be,
goodness.
exactly.
It's interesting because I heard some people discussing about this tool recently, and they were actually recommending to each other to use it for personal issues. They were trying to solve some friendly issues, like friendship issues.
It can be used
and
for
they
all of
actually
the
were
above,
saying we
right?
should use that so we can understand.
Like how you negotiate in a day. But
Yeah.
In a day, yes,
Very
in
useful for that
personal.
as well.
Interesting.
Right. But it's also, again, coming back to technology. The technology
Yeah.
is very useful, but if you still do not understand the human dimension, the best preparation, the best strategic idea does not work, because it still is really important in terms of how you negotiate at that human dimension.
Ultimately,
helps.
it's human activity
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
enabled by a tool called technology.
Right, exactly.
So let me again bring another question on the table. Professor Teagarden, what recent changes in the concept of global competitive advantage do you see there that will shape the company's interests during the negotiations?
Well, one of the themes that is very popular right now is a concept that's called blue oceans. Do not compete head to head with others in your industry. And that takes you to a place where instead of competition, you think about collaboration and those collaborative trends. How can we do things that haven't been done before? How can we create value for customers that we haven't served before? Those kinds of movements within the field of global strategy take us much more to a cooperative future than a competitive future. So that would be one of the really big trends that would have a fundamental influence on negotiations. You start at win-win and work backwards.
Very interesting. Professor Walsh, it's one of your major
Exactly.
teachings, the win-win situation.
Right, exactly. And this is what I would call the raw material for innovation, is everything we've been talking about here today. Because if you have that kind of working trust, and you can include all of these diverse ideas and ways of looking at things, we can actually create some new products, some new methods, new systems that arise out of these kinds of negotiations. But it's built around this what I call is that power of understanding. And the learning techniques, we do this a lot with the students to learn the techniques of the loop of understanding, for example. That you think you heard something, but how do you perfect the understanding in that situation so you actually can have that social resonance that leads to more creativity and innovation? This is where I see are the real trends right now, is capturing that kind of energy, that kind of vitality, and that kind of power to, I would say, have power with one another as opposed to power over one another.
It's power with. That is
Right.
such an important concept, Karen.
Right, exactly. That's what I see
Such
as
an important
the
concept.
current trend. Exactly.
That's right where the field is going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That concept sounds for me like shifting from the perspective of you and me in a negotiation to we. And that's completely different. Like, it's kind of strategic alliance. It's a collaboration. It goes much deeper. Like it's kind of starting living together. So you not live separately and just have some business, but you start living together, and that takes a lot.
Yeah, that mind melding, the coming together, so important.
Right.
And especially in the knowledge age. When we were in the industrial age, the adversarial relationship may have made sense. We were dividing up a pie. But in the knowledge age, you're creating bigger pies. And we do that by innovation and by working together.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the end of our podcast for today. I'm just going to bring some of the major points we discussed. First, it's actually, we can see here how hard it is to do business in emerging markets, and soft skills are very important to actually succeed in that. It's very important to have the expertise and to know how you can create value. It's important to be prepared when you go there to negotiate what can you offer and what value can you bring for the other party, so that you have more leverage for your negotiation. Research using tools, as we said, from technology to build more information, software that can actually help companies understand and build a strategy and then focus on the soft skills is very useful. And we should never underestimate how important to build trust, especially in emerging market is. As you said, Professor, trust is the guarantor. It has to come first before you do business in most parts of the world. Style switching, cultural fit, understanding where you come from, what's your tendencies, wearing a wristband that makes you feel uncomfortable and remind you, videotaping yourself, preparing is important. So this was the end of our podcast for today. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And see you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Online around the world, this is Thunderbird Knowledge Network, negotiating with the power of understanding.